I'd like for you to stand for the reading of the Word this morning, taken from 1 Corinthians chapter 10. I'd like to commence to read with verse 1, read through verse 6, and then read from 11 through verse 13. Moreover, brethren, I would not that ye should be ignorant, how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, and did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things were our examples, to the intent we should not lust after evil things, as they also lusted. Verse 11, Now all these things happen unto them for ensamples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. There hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God, who is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that ye may be able to bear it. Now, dear Savior, you know about our needs today. For while we've been here in the blessed moments of worship, and have been tuned in to thy Spirit as thou hast spoken, yet we are mindful that among us always in every service there are needs. There are needs of encouragement. There are needs of coming to know thee better. There are needs of folk walking in the light. And there are needs of giving thee all the glory. So we ask that thou wilt move among us in these moments that follow as we share together in the Word of God. And for whatever good or whatever gain or whatever glory may come into someone's life as a result of thy Word, we shall bow humbly and do now, lowly at thy feet, and ascribe unto thee all the praise. In Jesus' name we have asked it. Amen. There's one word in this passage that I'd like to bring to your attention this morning. And it probably isn't the word that you are thinking of. I doubt very much if it is. It is the last word in verse 5. And yet, I don't want you, as you look at that word, to think a negative thought. Not this morning. Sometime maybe, but not now. The word is wilderness. That's hard not to think a negative thought, isn't it? But the wilderness was God's will for the Israelites in leading them to the land of Canaan. So since it was in line with God's will for them to come through the wilderness, I don't want you to think of it negatively. I would like for you to note these additional scriptures, the first in Leviticus 25:38. For he said, I am the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan and to be your God. Amen. And in Hosea 2:14 and 15, he said, Therefore, behold, I will allure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak comfortably unto her. And I will give her vineyards from thence and the valley of Achor for a door of hope, and she shall sing there as in the days of her youth, as in the day when she came up out of the land of Egypt. And in Isaiah 35:6, For in the wilderness shall waters break out and streams in the desert. That ought to be enough right there to keep us from thinking negative thoughts here for a few moments. May the Lord help us in these moments that follow. There were essentially two crowds in the wilderness. Sometimes they were so intermingled together that you cannot quite separate them by name. Maybe in certain cases you can, like Caleb and Joshua, but with some scriptures that we have about this, there is a little difficulty in separating them too much, especially the 16th chapter of the first part of the 16th chapter of Exodus. But I think there were essentially two crowds in the wilderness. There was that crowd that was in God's will. And pretty much they remained in God's will. And for them it was a place of redemption. It was a place of replenishment from God. It was certainly a place of romance. It was a place of blessing. But then there was that crowd that was out of God's will, and for them it was a place of rebellion, rejection, refusal, and finally retribution. It was a place of judgment. Now it was the same acreage that was covered, and it was the same miles for each of these crowds, for they were together. They were one tribe. They were several tribes, but they were one people from the stock of Abraham. They came from the same root. They were probably from 2 to 3 million strong. They were Israelites, but in the two crowds they were of totally different heart and practice. I will remember that Kadesh was a place where the majority retreated from and rejected God's will, which was for them Canaan. But this wasn't the only place that they had evidenced this rejection. It really began on just as they'd come out of Egypt. It began really at the Red Sea. But I'd like for you to stay by the stuff here this morning and look at it. If you wanted an outline, I don't know that I'll fully follow it. I will a little bit. Maybe some parts of it I'll skip. But the wilderness for them was a place of redemption. And as a result of being a place of redemption, it was the place of rescue and reflection and refreshment. Secondly, it was to be a place for them of replenishment from God. They were fresh out of everything. And therefore, it was a place of rest for them. They toiled and labored and served with hard rigor, and they needed rest. It was a place of receiving. It was a place of restoration, a place of reassurance. But for some of them, it was a place of rebellion from God. And thus it became a place for them of ridicule of their leaders and of God, a place of retreat, and a place of rejection, and a resolve not to go into Canaan. And fourthly, it was a place of reckoning of God. They were reproved, they were renounced, and they were refused. Now, I can't get all of that, and I'm not even going to try. And I suspect that some of you didn't get it all written down, and that's all right, too. But I do want the Holy Ghost to help us in these moments that follow, and I think He shall, if we see a little bit of what I think there is to see in the Scripture. I want to say that I believe that unless we have a revival on the level of the truth of the message that was given last night, I say on the level of that truth, we are going to miss it and see the mantle fall on another people altogether. Just as easily as that mantle fell on another crowd from one crowd in that wilderness. The wilderness. It was never to have been a place of rebellion. It was never to have been a place of retribution. Instead, it was to be a place of blessing. And I'd like to speak to you for a little while, maybe most of the message on the wilderness blessings rather than the wilderness curses and wanderings. It was to the wilderness that Jesus fled when his fame rose to fever pitch in Luke 5, and he withdrew himself into the wilderness and prayed. For Moses, it was a wilderness toward Sinai, the backside of the desert, in Acts 7:30, where the angel of the Lord, where at least it's recounted that the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a bush of flame. Hosea calls the wilderness a place of romance. Yes, he does. He says with vineyards in it. A door of hope, the valley of Achor, a place for singing, a place, hopefully, that Gomer will receive restoration. It was to be all that. I want to strongly present this morning, as the Lord being my helper, that the wilderness place for the Israelites, and it was about them that he was speaking through Hosea as well as Gomer, was a place of the redeemed from Egypt. Had he not said, when telling them to leave Egypt and giving them Moses as their leader, that this shall be the beginning of days and weeks and months, years unto you? You're going to start over and have a new calendar. We are going to forget the old one and the past, and I'm going to bring you to a new future, a new calendar. The stage is set. The lamb is slain. The blood is applied. Then comes the Red Sea crossing, the drowning of the taskmasters, and the journey is begun. And the culmination of that journey, as we see it in Old Testament typology, was Canaan. But the culmination of our journey is not Canaan alone, or Canaan representing the freedom and the blessing of a clean heart, as David Lee used to call that blessing so often here on this campus, and when the Bible College still was on this campus, and he was one of the teachers. But the culmination of that trip is to be another land, and that's the place called heaven. But it takes an awful lot of Canaan to get to heaven. It takes a lot of Canaan before you can arrive in that city. And Canaan represents not only instantaneous work of grace, but it represents a life to be lived. But I do like to think about that new birth. I do like to think about that deliverance from 430 years of bondage. I do like to think about Israel as they came out of the land of Egypt to go on and go in and go on again. I like to think about this critical experience. I like to think about the fact that they got rid of those old taskmasters and saw them drown in the depths of the sea. And I like to think about that night when I came and prayed clear through, and the Lord came to my rescue and absolved me of all the record and freed me from all of the bondage and wrote my name down in the Lamb's Book of Life and said, now from now on you're my child, and I'll lead you and guide you and keep you, and you've started a journey that you never need to stop. There are no stopping places, but you can go on until it gets you inside the gates of the city. I like to think about that. I like to think about the cloud. I like to think about the witness of the Spirit. They had a real witness in that cloud. In Exodus 14, 19 through 20. It hovered over them. It went before them. It removed and got around behind them to cut off the enemy. It was upon all sides of them, and for them it was light, and for the enemy it was darkness. I like to think about that deliverance and the witness of the Spirit that come to let us know we'd gotten out of Egypt and that he was traveling along with us as we went on our way serving him. How wonderful to know that we have the witness of the Spirit. Mr. Wesley said, by the testimony of the Spirit, I mean that inward witness or impression on the soul whereby the Spirit of God immediately and directly witnesses with my spirit that I am a child of God. And the book says that old things are passed away, and behold, all things are become new. We can know that we're out of Egypt and that we're on the way. And the thing that amazes me sometimes is how far God will go to go down into that place called Egypt to get somebody out of that land, to get somebody out of that bondage. Lieutenant Whitaker of Eddie Rickenbacker fame, following the Second World War, testified about being on that raft in the middle of the Pacific. He said, I was 40 years old. I'd never been to church or had never prayed until we got out there, marooned on that raft in the middle of the sea with the waves all around us. And there adrift on the lonely Pacific with no hope, finally no water, for all of our water was run out, and no food. He said, I saw, as we were bleaching under the heavy sun, I saw a cloud pass over us, and I heard Bill Cherry pray. And out there I saw that cloud reverse its direction and come back over us and drench us with such a deluge of water that it kept us alive for several more days. But he said, as time went on, all hope was given up, for we were bleaching, dehydrating under the sun. And he said we saw a distant island appear. First thought maybe it was a mirage, but then saw that it was real. But then we took note that the waves that were pushing us along on that raft adrift swept us away from the island rather than toward it. And Bill Cherry prayed again. And when Bill Cherry prayed, he said it appeared as though a hand reached up from the depths of the sea and took a hold of the bottom of the raft. And against the waves of the sea started that island coming. He either took the raft, he said, and put it toward the island, or else he reached up just as easily and got a hold of the island and brought it to us. But the distance was closed, and we got to the island. And he said, out there I met God. Out there I met God. I, the one that had never prayed. I, the one that had never been sustained by church and never attended church. I met God on that raft. And it's amazing how far he'll go to rescue the perishing. But the second thing is that this wilderness was a place of replenishment from God. Now think of it for a moment. 430 years in a strange land, perhaps most of those years, more than half of them, as abject slaves. Fresh out of everything, serving with hard rigor, needing rest, and the wilderness was just the place to find it. It was a land of affliction from which they had come. Hard bondage, lives bitter, death, darkness, and disease. No one to love them. They certainly weren't in Egypt on any kind of a vacation. But I really do think that God wanted to give them a vacation from Egypt, and that's what the wilderness was meant to be. A place in his plan where he could just heap all kinds of blessings on them and take care of them in every way, so that they would know as they came from being a tribe, and he brought them in and oriented them into becoming a nation through which the Word of God could come to all mankind, and through which he could bless all mankind. This was to be a place where they would become strong, and they would see the answers to their prayers and learn the lessons that he wants to teach every person in any dispensation that follows him. And they weren't very long out of there after they got over their ecstasy of the holy dance. It wasn't an unholy dance. It was a holy one. The unholy kind is still wrong just as much as it was when the Methodists put it in their discipline and said it was wrong, and just as much as it would be for any red-blooded man to take somebody into his arms other than his own companion and still try to keep the Ten Commandments. There may be some sissies among us that could do all that, but there aren't any red-blooded men that can dance with somebody else in your arms other than your companion and keep your mind straight, your head on straight, and your heart right. Jesus said that in the Sermon on the Mount. He didn't mention dancing, but he said to look to lust. And some of you women are naive when you think that a man can do that. I don't know what women think, because I've never been a woman, but I'll tell you what, I am a man, and there's not one bit of feminine strain of feminine blood flowing in my veins as far as being like a woman. I am not like a woman. Well, you say, well, that's right. I can see that by looking at you. You're not like a woman. I understand all that. But I want to say something. You aren't out of this world yet. And the drives that are God-given will never be taken away from you. If you get as old and gray-headed as the oldest person and the white-headedest fellow that's here. Somebody mentioned two people mentioned my gray hair. And one of them sitting in a wheelchair over there, and her hair looks so nice and brown and black. And she said, "You're getting snow-covered, Brother Humble." Somebody else mentioned, and I said, "Yeah, but I still got all of it." Better not brag about that, I might lose it. One fellow said the Lord liked him so much, loved him so much, that he was clearing off another acreage up there, a bit of space to give him another face up there. But I didn't say that. You know, God's interested in us, and God knows our needs. God knows our needs, He knows our name, and He knows our nature, and He wants to bring us out of all the darkness into that marvelous light. But they weren't in that land very long after they got past the place where they were having the ecstasy of joy until they hit Marah. And when they hit Marah, they found out, when they rushed up to that spring or that fountain of water, or that lake of water, that the water was undrinkable. It was not sweet. And it won't be very long after you get out of Egypt until you meet the place called Marah. And it's no use for you to think that you're going on a vacation trip from which there's never any return to the burden. There are going to be battles. And when they got to the place of Marah, they had their first battle. But that teaches us a lesson. It says that Moses cried to the Lord. And the song says it, take your burden to the Lord and leave it there. That ought to be put down as number one lesson from the passage, and that is when you get under the strain and the stress of the first battle after you get out of Egypt, don't go back to Egypt, but take it to the Lord in prayer. God still answers prayer. A young couple got converted in the church where I pastored, and I wasn't converted too many months, to a very long time. He, with his shining face and wonderful testimony, blessed many a prayer meeting, until one night they came to the prayer meeting, and the face was long and not blessed, and there was no encouragement that came from them that night in the testimony meeting. In fact, no testimony at all. And the people were going out the door after the prayer meeting and testimony meeting, and they lingered. They stood over aside, and they didn't go out. And when everybody had gone out, they said, "We've got to see you, Pastor." And we went back into the room, the study, and when they got in there, they told me the story. They said very deliberately, "I've never had anybody say to me before, I've never since, nor before, ever had anybody do what they did. I've had people leave. I've had people go back to Egypt. I've had people give up the battle, but I never had anybody do what they did." Out of courtesy for what had happened since Sunday night that had discouraged them, and they had concluded that they had to give up and go back to the world and not serve God anymore. Out of courtesy, they had come to one more service to tell their pastor that they couldn't go on, and that since Sunday night they are having to give up. And they told me the story. He worked in town, but he had a few acres of ground, and they had to supplement their income. He had a few cattle, had 4 or 5 cows. And they said that somebody threw some trash over the fence into where the cattle were, and they all got some of that trash. The cattle ate some of it. And that since Sunday night, every one of them had died. Every cow had died. And when every cow, the last cow had breathed her last, the devil came and stepped across the threshold of their lives and said, "See there, I told you all the time you didn't get anything in the first place. And even if you did get something, God isn't with you now, or that would not have happened, that could not have happened. And so they, being young in the faith, concluded that since they had had a marrow, they'd come to a place where the waters were not sweet but bitter, that they had to go back to Egypt. But I did like them because they came and they told me. And I listened to their story and I said, all right. I knew what kind of people they were. I knew how blessed they were of God and had been. I said, who's going to be your friends from now on? I don't know why I said that. A lot of things I've said when I was counseling and pastoring that I wondered where it came from, and I wondered where that came from. I didn't say it very smoothly, and I didn't say it even in the kindest of a voice. I just said, all right, it's the way it is. Who's going to be your friends? And they got to thinking. They got to thinking about the old crowd that had once been their friends. And then they sized that up against the crowd that were now their friends. At the same time, they got to counting their blessings with a little bit of help from me to suggest a few of them. And when they got through, I'll never forget it, he had a quick way about him, not only a shiny face. He looked at her. She looked over more slowly at him, but looked at him. And he said, I don't think I want to go back. Cows or no cows, I don't think I want to go back. He said, I don't think I want to leave. And we had one of the most blessed camp meetings in that office right there in that pastor's study that I've ever been in, on our knees together as we linked hands and said, we're going on. Not only them, but me too. I needed the blessing too, and my cows hadn't even died. I didn't even have any to die. Well, I'll take that back. I've got a little share in the cattle on 1,000 hills. I don't know how many of them are mine, but he's mine. And he said, I'll never leave thee nor forsake thee, so that means I've got a share in the cattle business. And I don't know what they're bringing. I know prices are down in some places, but the kind of cattle he has, the prices are not down. And thank God he's able to meet every need. Do you know that Elam is just a complement to Marah? That's right. Doesn't tell us much about Elam. Well, it tells us a lot about Elam, but it does not elaborate very long on it. Doesn't stay there very long. It said when they left Marah, they came to Elam where there was 12 wells and 70 palm trees. And every time you gain the victory over Marah, there's always a well of water that is everlastingly coming and meeting the need and sustaining the soul that you'll come to at the next turn. It's just that way. Thank God for the water and the shade in the wilderness. And they took their journey in the next chapter of the book of Exodus and came to the wilderness of sin. Isn't that awful? And right here's one of these places where there's a gray area where you can't divide the crowd as good as you can some other places. Really, you can't. Said the whole congregation got to murmuring. I don't know for sure whether it was everybody in the congregation or else just all the heads of the tribes. But they got to murmuring. And they said, you're going to kill this whole assembly. If you keep leading us this direction and we keep going this direction, you're going to kill every member of this assembly off. We're going to die in the wilderness. And they murmured and they complained. Now right there would be a good place for God just to cut the whole bunch off and let them drop right into the pit. And that's where a lot of people would cut a lot of people off, other people off. But right there's where God starts saying, I will. I don't know whether you've ever read it or not. You know, it's hard for us sometimes to remember after we've been in the way for quite a while, the stumblings and the mumblings and the grumblings that came forth when we'd arrived at Marah right after we got out of Egypt and everything wasn't rosy. We've forgotten about that first year out of Egypt, especially when we're applying and looking at somebody else and wondering how they ought to be. But here's what he said. He said, I'll rain bread from heaven. I'll rain bread from heaven. He doesn't run out on his children. I don't know fully. Pastors sometimes will run out on you. They've been known to do it. Church members sometimes run out on you, and the intercessors will stop praying and get too busy to pray. But the Lord said, I'll rain bread from heaven on you. I've not brought you into this wilderness to die. I'll rain bread from heaven on you. That's better than Omar's truck. Now, I know that dates me, but it's better than Kroger's too. The Omar truck used to come by our farm when I was a little kid. And the only thing in the world he could sell at our house was once in a great while, when we could talk Mom into it, we'd get a cinnamon roll. Never was good as Mom's, but it came out of a bright red truck. And we'd sometimes talk her into it. I don't know why they ever came up the lane. What in the world did we have to do? Would we want much with Omar bread when Mom was baking it every week? And Pop couldn't even go to town, but what she'd always, to make him hurry, get the bread to raising before they left, so that he'd have to hurry to come back, and she could get back when she wanted to get back there, and he wouldn't linger too much at the implement store by saying to him, the bread is raisin. And it wasn't raisin bread. Said, I will rain bread from heaven on you. I'll rain it down. The fellow said to me in my second pastorate, didn't say it exactly to me, he said it to the Sunday school class in my hearing. He's the first elder. First elders could be wrong, pastors can be wrong, second elders can be wrong, third elders can be wrong, anybody can be wrong, any elder can be wrong once in a while. And he made this statement. He said, there's one thing I found. He'd only been converted about 3 or 4 years, and he already knew this. He said, there's one thing I found out. Everybody has the same amount of light. And that's the only thing wrong with that. It just ain't so. But you want to be careful. You're not one of the crowd that had a lot of light and now no longer are walking in it. If you don't have as much light as somebody else, you better be in the crowd that never had it, rather than the people that had it and gave it up. You say, I don't like that theology. I don't either, but it's still so. Because whenever you give up and go back, you're running out on God. Well, I better go on. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to bless you, not lose you, but the Lord will help you if you walk in the light. And it says the glory of the Lord appeared to them in the cloud. There's that cloud coming back again. The glory of the Lord appeared unto them in the cloud. You know what the cloud actually represents? I said the witness of the Spirit. It actually represents the Holy Spirit, as far as I can determine. It really does. For the Israelites, it came, as we've already said, but it came also on the mount when Moses went up there to receive the commandments. It came in the most holy place as the Shekinah light. It even removed itself as long from that ancient people clear down to the time where it hovered over the Mount of Transfiguration when Moses and Elijah came and appeared before Peter, James, and John in the presence of the transfigured Lord. That cloud was the cloud in which Jesus went up when he ascended. And I wouldn't be surprised that it'll be the cloud when he comes riding back, when he comes back to this earth again. He said, behold, in what manner you've seen him go, you're also going to see him come back again. But I do believe that it represents the Holy Spirit. And he had said, if you will obey me, and if you'll keep my rules, if you'll walk in the light, you will be a peculiar treasure of my love, and I'll take care of you. If you walk in the light. If you obey my commandments. And the commandments were given on that mount. There's an awesome theology, awful theology, and awesome in my thinking as well, running around the country, saying we are not under law, but we're under grace, and when they say that, they mean that we can live haphazard now but they couldn't back there. I don't understand that at all, because the Scripture says that there was a day when God winked at the ignorance of man, but now commandeth all men everywhere to repent, to turn from their wicked ways. And when the Lord dealt in his great treatise of the Sermon on the Mount with the commandments, and I have the feeling he dealt with all of them in that Sermon on the Mount, some of them more particularly and evidently before our eyes than others, but I think he dealt with all of them. He always brought a closer line of truth in reference to obedience than they were ever understood in the Old Testament time. That's right. Take anger, killing, and reduces it to anger. He takes commit adultery, and he reduces it to a look of lust. Well, you could go on and on with it, because I think they're dealt with. You'll be a peculiar treasure, my love. And Jesus, when talking about the Holy Spirit as the promise of the Father and as the Comforter to come, you remember that several times he prefaced the great promise by saying, if you love me, keep my commandments. Walk in the light. Obey. Obedience. The truth. Walk as you ought to walk, as the Scripture says you ought to walk, as dear children, as faithful children, as children that are born out of due time and out of season and out from the world, have been brought out of Egypt. Walk in the light. And as you walk in the light, I'm going to pray. When I go, I'll pray the Father, and he'll give you another comforter, even the Spirit of truth whom the world cannot receive. Not in this way. Not in this way of the mighty baptism. You'll receive him. I think the cloud comes up again. But let's go back for a moment to the I will. If we don't even get through, it's all right. I can break off. My sermons are like freight trains anyway. You can just uncouple them anywhere and hook on the caboose. And one woman said, I wish you'd have hooked the caboose on a little quicker in that one. He said, I will not only rain bread from heaven, I'm going to send you quail on an east wind. Have you ever eaten quail? How many have ever eaten quail? I mean back when it was in season, or raised them to eat. Several of us. I used to love to hunt quail more than anything else. I used to hunt them out here sometimes in those ravines out here on the church farm. Now, don't everybody run to the church farm and hunt, because you can't hunt quail anymore, and the pheasants all been shot out, and the rabbits are all over the fence now on that over there in that swamp. So not much used to go, and the rabbits about all been killed too, and died along the way. But I used to have more fun hunting quail there and up on the farm in Champaign County, and one day Morton Dorsey said to me, when we had our offices up here, he came over and put his hands on his hips and he said, I want to go quail hunting, and I want to go right away. And I said, all right, you be ready to go at 1 o'clock and we'll go. But of course, he knew I'd been up there on the farm hunting several times, because when quail season comes in, I could arrange to get away, because I like quail. Since I mentioned Morton, I'll tell you how that came out. He'd never hunted quail. I've hunted them a lot of times, and I know what you got to do. If you're going to get enough for breakfast, or you're going to get enough for any meal, you better shoot before they get off the ground. You better shoot one or two while they're on the ground. Now, I know you're not allowed to shoot in the covey, but the covey doesn't always just stay right together. They'll run ahead of you. And so you start shooting before they get up. We went up there and walked from 2 o'clock in the afternoon to 4 o'clock and never saw a quail. They'd all gone over on the next farm because you couldn't hunt over there. And we came in, and my brother said to me, have you found any quail? And I said, not a one, they've all gone. He said, I know where there's one covey that's never been disturbed. They're down here in the stalks where they pick the corn. We got in the truck with him and went down, and he didn't carry a gun, but he got between us, and we started up between the rows of the corn, and it started out through there, and pretty soon I saw one running right straight ahead of me, right down the row. And I got him, but when I got him, that place exploded. I mean, there were quail around our feet, there were quail everywhere, and they all went off just like a storm off to the ahead of us and off to the left. And Morton started firing, and he fired 5 times as fast as he could pump shells into that gun, and it just smoked and smoked, that gun did, And when it was done, he put his hands back on his hips, as he had done that morning when he said he wanted to go quail hunting. And he said, "I do declare," he said, "I believe I was just shooting at the covey as they were flying." He thought there were so many up there, and he got a little bit unnerved, and he thought there were so many up there you couldn't miss. But brother, you'll miss them every time if you don't pick out one at a time singularly. But he didn't go home too bad, because he went home with 3. I gave him all I had. I got 2 more when they was going out. But I aimed at them instead of at the cloud of them going. I said, "Did you ever eat quail?" We went into a restaurant in Harlan, Kentucky, where some people in the Methodist church down there where I was in a revival said, "We're going to take you out for supper. We're going to get you a steak." And went in, and I looked up there on the board, and lo and behold, they had quail. But the quail was $7.50 for each meal, and the steak was $4, $3.99. For his benefit, we ate steak, but I wanted quail. And Brother Trueblood used to tell me about the fact that down there in his country in eastern North Carolina, that those quail hunters killed so many quail and put them in the freezer and had them that they could have quail meals about any time they wanted to. And finally I got to go down and hold a revival in his old home church called Bagley Swamp, but that isn't a bad word down there. That's a beautiful church, and it's a beautiful area. They name a lot of places by swamps down there. And went out there, and one day, one of those one-night services, one of those fellows said, "Don't eat any supper tomorrow night. You're coming to our house for supper after service." And the singers and I, we went to that house, and it was just like Brother Trueblood said it'd be. He told me in several revivals where I had him that they had meat plates down there about like that. And he said when they lined the quail up, they lined them right clear all the way around that meat plate. There might be 14, a dozen or 14 on one meat plate. And when they got in there that night, that woman brought that meat plate out, and it's just exactly like Trueblood said. There was, I believe it was 13 or 14 quail lined up on that, and we did have us a meal. Quail's the best meat I ever tasted, unless it be kid goat. The Bible talks about kid goat, and I'll take some of that any time I can get it, but I believe I like quail a little better. Some of you fellas don't know anything about quail, and you don't know anything about kid goats. You don't know what really tastes good. But I want to tell you, Jesus didn't bother about the goats at that time. He had been serving that to Abraham way back, but he told them, and he'd give them all the quail they needed and all they wanted and all that they'd have to sustain them, and he did it. He didn't go second class. God doesn't go second class, and he doesn't want his children to go second class. He gave them quail. And then another thing, he didn't give them Blue Cross nor Blue Shield. I wonder sometimes and I'm not speaking disparagingly of this because they paid our bill, they paid my bill when I went to surgery, but I wonder what they mean sometimes when they called it Blue Shield. I wondered who they're shielding and what they're shielding from. Every time we get a little bit, a few folks sick a little more than the ordinary, they raise the rates. Now, I'm not speaking against them. I'm just telling you that this plan that he had for Israel was better. That's the only thing I'm drawing from that, is that his shield plan was a lot better, and it wasn't blue. But he said, "I'll heal all of your sicknesses. I'll take care of all of them." He'd already told them that he was going to pay their board bill, send them all the board they needed, and now he's going to take care of all their sicknesses. And he said, "Oh, by the way, we're going to build a tabernacle, and I'm going to come down in my glory and hover over that tabernacle, and once a year let my kind of light shine on the inner sanctuary of that tabernacle, and I want it fixed up just right so that those skins that you brought over, those badger skins that you brought through the Red Sea and brought over here to make shoes for your feet, I'd like to have that. I'd like to have those skins to put on the roof of the holy place in the most holy place. I want those badger skins. I want you to give up your shoe leather." And here they came wondering how in the world they're going to get through the wilderness, but they brought the shoe leather. And when they brought their shoe leather in, he said, "Now I'll take care of your feet. I'll take care of your feet from here on the rest of the journey. I'll take care of your feet because I'm going to take care of your shoes. They're not going to wear out." And when God fixes shoes up till they won't wear out, you won't have any bunions on the feet or the toes, and you won't have any corns to put plasters on. God will take care of them until you can walk right. And I like to think that God's still taking care of the feet of his children. They don't run to do wickedness. They don't go to see how worldly they can be. They don't go to the worldly places anymore. They're walking in the light. The colored folks sang about the shoes before they could even write about shoes. Just in the cotton patches of the south part of our country, they would begin to sing. That's the way their songs were brought forth. They weren't written, they were generated. And there were some of the young people in my mind one day out there with a hose in their hands, and they're hoeing the cotton, that got to grumbling that the white folks are the ones that had the shoes, and they were out there barefooted and didn't have any shoes. And old Grandpa from his row way over a ways in the cotton patch kind of looked their direction once with a look of reprimand, but also a joyful note, and says, "You got shoes." And Grandma took up on it and said, "I got shoes." And there came a chant from all the rows of cotton until it even enveloped the young people, and it said, "All of God's children got shoes." Of course, some of them didn't get to put them on quite as quick as others, but they said, "We may not have them in this life, the kind the white folks have got, but someday God's got our shoes all stashed up and put together, and they're all prepared as far as that kind of shoes is, and when we see Him, we'll be able to put on our shoes. When I get to heaven, I'm going to put on my shoes and walk all over God's heaven." It's just a matter of when you use them, that's all. And what if it is that you have to go barefooted in this life? What if it is that you have to stub your toe once in a while, and you will? Thank God He'll take care of you. He said, "I'll see you through. I'll supply your need. I'll pay your board bill. I'll take you through when the answer comes." It got dry again. They'd left Elam a long time ago, and it got dry again, and God said, "Just strike the rock." I know He said speak to the rock one time, but this time He said strike the rock. And He struck that rock, Oreb, and the water came gushing forth, and it filled all 3 million of them. And it satisfied them. But then they couldn't stay right there where the water was gushing out, and they traveled for 40 years. You know they did, but the water was still there. It said it followed after them. It still kept coming. I'm amazed at the goodness of God. I know there's a crowd didn't make it. I know there was a rebellious crowd, but He said, "I'll keep my promise." And there were 2 crowds, and that one crowd didn't make the 10 nameless spies their captains, but they took as their captains Caleb and Joshua, and they said, "We're going to go on, and we're going to go in." And so they just kept on walking, and kept on living for God, and kept on serving in spite of the murmuring and the complaining. And in spite of the murmuring and the complaining, God still rained bread from heaven and still sent the quails on an east wind. And every once in a while, because they didn't have water enough to carry along with them, and they couldn't take the old rock right with them, He said, "Oh, princes, dig." And there were some princes among them, and they began to dig, and there was a shaft of water that ran from the rock of Oreb underground until wherever they digged and wherever they needed it, it would gush up in an inundating supply, because God had not run out on them. What am I saying this morning? I'm saying God's not in the business of running out on people that are walking the light. And He's even blessed some people that refuse to walk in the light. But oh, the danger, because there comes a separation in the crowds. So they kept on digging, and they were either digging for water or they were digging graves all the way. They dug for the water, and it came gushing up, and they dug graves for those reprobates that wouldn't give in and hadn't given in and said, "Carry us not over, and we'll elect a captain and go back to the wilderness." They dug graves for them. And finally, after they dug about all the graves they needed to be dug, and Joshua had told them even at Kadesh, I don't want you to think he can't do it for us. Just remember what he did at the Red Sea, and remember the grapes that we brought back from Canaan. And Caleb says, the man who had another spirit within him, said, "We can take this land. We could go right in," but they didn't go in. But Caleb and Joshua kept right on saying they could go in, and they could have gone in, and someday God's going to bring us in, and God will bring us in. There's no place in the whole Bible that teaches a weak, emaciated, unconquering church, but it does teach the church of the mighty rushing wind, and the church of the out of your innermost soul shall flow rivers of living water. I'll admit, when you look at the depravity that our brother spoke so clearly about last night, when you see that cesspool of iniquity, that disarrangement of the fallen nature, that awful thing discussed in the verses here between the 6th verse and the 11th verse in this chapter that I read to you, with its doubt and its idolatry and the fornicators and the murmurers and the divided heart crowd that were in the process of headed toward Egypt, but they still had their heart toward Canaan, but had their heart toward Egypt. I'll admit, when you look at the cesspool of depravity, you wonder if there's ever any victory for such a wickedness within, and a wickedness with which we're born, and a bent and a twist in our nature. But when you stand by the empty tomb and hear him say, I am he that was dead, but behold, I'm alive forevermore, and realize that he did suffer without the gate to sanctify the people, then you know with Caleb and Joshua the land can be taken. And if you'll be like Esther of old, I'm going in, if I perish, I perish, dig the last grave and make the last digging to get that last supply. You can come through the Jordan and you can find that land of Canaan, notwithstanding there are walled cities and there are giants to fight. Thank God there's help from the name of the Lord to fight every one of them and see the walls come down. God does not run out on his people. God said, I brought you out, I want to bring you in, and if you'll follow hard after me, we'll get there. Well, I'm closing. But I'm closing with a thought that I read to you of Hosea. Hosea spoke to the children. He wasn't even sure that they were his. And he was speaking to them about Gomer. He wanted them to go and see if they could find her. And then he entered into a season of romance in his own thinking. And he said, I'm going to go and I'm going to allure her. Talking about their courtship all over. You and I know the story. You know that she ran out on him. You know that she went back to the streets. You know that she sold herself into the slavery of wickedness. And you know that when he went out there by this time, she likely was diseased and all the rest of it. But he said, I'm going to go and I'm going to allure her. I'm going to speak kindly to her. I'm going to pay whatever price is needed to redeem her. And I'm going to take her, not simply bring her home, kids. I'm not going to bring her back to you right now. I'm going to take her to the wilderness. And I'm going to take her to the valley of Achor. And it shall be there for her a door of hope. There are vineyards there. You remember the other place in the scripture where the valley of Achor is mentioned? It's mentioned in reference to Achan. It's where Achan died. There's a death in the valley of Achor, but there's also life, because right after Achan was put out of commission and gone, and they got rid of that awful discrepancy in the camp, and that awful failure in the camp, it says that God blessed them in the valley of Achor. And Hosea was dwelling on the fact of the blessing side, and he said, I'll get her in there, and I'll get her on those good grapes, I'll get her on those vineyards, I'll get her in there, and it shall be a door of hope for her. She's so far gone that it doesn't look like there's any hope for her, but he said, I'm going to get her in there, and I'm going to speak comfortably to her. I'm going to speak words of romance to her. I'm going to lead her. I'm going to guide her. I'm going to bless her, and it shall be well with her, and she's going to find a way out of the dilemma. She's going to find a way out of the disease. And that all just sums up what God did when he sent his only begotten Son to this world. They've made a mess out of it. They've made a mess out of it. They've run out on me. They've gone back on me. They've got hell in their heart, but I'm not giving up on them yet. I'm going to send my Son down to lure them out of the wilderness, out of Egypt, into a land where it shall be a door of hope for them, and I'll help them to sing there, and I'll help them to pray there, and it'll be reconstruction days, and it'll be deliverance, it'll be healing days from the disease, it'll be a mighty deliverance. And God's still in the business yet today. He can still do it now. Stand to your feet, and God bless you. If anybody wants the blessing this morning, you could get it. Joe, if you can play that thing soft, I'd like for you to play it just as mellow and soft as you can. Use the bass notes, but use them quietly. And sing, and while he plays it as soft as he knows how, in the next 2 minutes, if you want help from the Lord and there's something that's battling and burdening you and you need help, and if carnality is in you and you didn't come to the altar last night and get complete cleansing, you could come this morning. But we're not going to linger long. But as Joe plays, I want you just to mind the Lord and let Him have His way. He's here. Let's bow our heads and hearts and hold steady unless you're coming. If you're coming, open your eyes and get on down and pray. I'm not going to linger long. I had no idea of trying to preach this little message. I preached it 3 or 4 times, 3 or 4 years ago, and then I laid it aside. And preachers, sometimes they think about where they're going to be on such and such a date, and I was preparing for Circleville, and I had a whole different set of them. I thought I was prepared, and this sure wasn't one of them. But when I got up this morning, before I ever got out of bed, I thought I had a meal of that manna and some of that quail, and He touched me and He met my need. We'll just wait and worship. Sometimes it's better just to worship than anything else. Thank you for your good attention this morning. I want to thank you for your prayers. I want to thank you for your love. I want to thank you for your grace and your patience. And I want to tell you before you go, I love you. And God bless you. You're at liberty to go as you choose. Get some victuals and come on back for this afternoon's service.